In the Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion, most quests that are given to the player are handed out through a simple conversation from a mundane NPC. Most of the time, the player knows exactly what they're getting themselves into by accepting to embark on these adventures. However, sometimes quests are received in some strange or unique ways and end up catching the player off guard. For example, all of the Daedric shrines have quests that the Daedric princes give out to the player directly through a form of telepathic communication. In another instance, simply by walking into the Shetcombe Farm cabin by Kvatch, the player activates the quest, the Sunken One, where no NPC interaction is even needed. Another would be the Rosethorn Cache quest, where upon finding a displaced, undelivered letter, the player undergoes a search for some hidden treasure within their house. In today's video, we'll be discussing 3 of the most unexpected quests that the player can receive in Oblivion. Before the list begins, an honorable mention for the video goes to the Sunken One quest, which was already covered in full detail for another video. If you have any quests that you think should have been included or should make part 2 of this list, drop them below and they'll be taken a look at. Technically, every side quest can be considered unexpected, but these are among the few missions that you truly have to go out of your way to engage in, as well as are also found to be fairly interesting and entertaining. Starting off the list is a quest titled An Unexpected Voyage. This quest begins with the player finding themselves in the Imperial District waterfront and are actively searching for a bed to sleep in. One of the more obscure places to wander into is actually an inn/tavern called the Bloated Float. This is one of the 2 ships currently in the harbor and is the boat on the western side of the waterfront. By boarding the ship, the player will notice it is a quaint yet cozy room that has been redesigned to act like a tavern. Upon speaking to the publican, a high elf named Ormil, a room below deck can be rented out for 10 gold. The player will then head to their new temporary sleeping quarters and get to rest in a bed for whatever purpose they need it for. Soon after, the player will awaken to find out from their journal that the bloated float has been put out to sea and that you'll have to figure out what is going on, thus officially beginning the quest. By leaving the rented room, the player spots a bandit named Lynch who will engage in conversation with you. It is through these unique dialogue options that the quest becomes very entertaining and unique. There are 2 separate dialogue pathways. One leads directly to a battle between the 2 of you, and the other portion only delays it for a short while, but interesting information can be discovered. By lying to Lynch, you find out that Ormil and his bouncer have been taken prisoner somewhere on the ship, and that Lynch is a part of a gang of 4 bandits who call themselves the Blackwater Brigands. Now, the player can dispatch Lynch and loot his body in order to find a key and some instructions. This key is used to unlock the storage room in order to set free the orc bouncer, Gromman Gromarid. Gromarid informs the player he can steer the ship back to the Imperial City, but the rest of the Blackwater Brigands need to be dealt with. The player agrees and moves on to the other part of the ship. At the top of the stairs, the player will see another bandit who calls herself Minx. In the same fashion as last time, the player can choose to either slay her right away or use unique dialogue options to find out even more interesting information. By saying Lynch, the bandit whom you just killed, has sent you, Minx reveals that the leader of the Blackwater Brigands' name is Celine, and that she has Ormil held captive in his own cabin. It is here that the dialogue turns hostile, and the player will then be forced to fight Minx to the death. Looting Minx's body, the player will find yet another key that can now be used to gain access to the upper deck. Ascending further, the player goes up more stairs, finds themselves outside on the upper deck, and comes face to face with the 3rd member of the Blackwater Brigands. His name is Wrath. Upon encountering Wrath, he opens the dialogue asking if anyone has found something called the Golden Galleon yet. Again, the player can cut to the chase and slay Wrath right then and there, or continue to find out more information. By telling Wrath that you are awaiting further orders and that you joined the Brigands 3 days ago, he reveals that they are searching for an object called the Golden Galleon, in which the 4 of them were going to bring to their safe house in Breville and fence the item for a high amount of gold in order to split 4 ways. It is here that the dialogue comes to an aggressive turn and the player is forced to defeat Wrath. Looting Wrath's body, the final key to Ormul's cabin is obtained, and the player tells Gromarad that he can make his way to the wheel in order to begin preparations back to the Imperial City. The player goes onto the final unexplored room of the ship that has the location of the brigand's boss, Ormul's cabin. Inside, the player will be met by Celine, who is overseeing the publican Ormul. Celine will begin her conversation by asking how you got in here. For the last time, the player decides if they would rather just skip the lengthy dialogue and duel Celine to the death in attempt to end the hijacking, or engage in unique dialogue to forego more bloodshed. Using all of the information you have learned from the previous 3 Blackwater Brigand members, the player will have the option to select correct dialogue prompts that forces Celine to surrender out of fear. She hands her weapon, the Blackwater Blade, over to the player, and Ormul asks you to escort her to a room down below, where she will remain until the guards can take her away back at the Imperial City. Returning back to the upper deck, the player can now talk to Ormul and find out what the Golden Galleon actually is. It turns out, due to slow business, Ormul fabricated the tale of a golden ship statuette, coined the Golden Galleon, that was apparently hidden somewhere on the bloated float. This was an attempt to bring in more business. However, seemingly backfired when a group of bandits came aboard and completely took over the ship. It is here that the player will head back down to their previously rented room and sleep once more in order to return back to the Imperial City docks. Now that you're back, the player can talk to Ormul and receive a leveled reward of gold. Overall, this is a very fun quest that utilizes dialogue instead of thoughtless bloodshed in order to best a group of bandits. Moreover, this quest can be considered so remote due to the fact that it relies on the player renting a room on a ship that in itself is far flung from your attention. The second unexpected quest on this list is titled Zero Visibility. If the player finds themselves along the Red Ring Road, north of the Imperial City, you can find a little hamlet called Ailswell. This small and seemingly abandoned community has a couple of houses, farming property, and an inn. By entering Ailswell Inn, the player will note that this small area feels very deserted and you're left wondering where everyone is. This is when, with a bit of a scare, someone from inside approaches you, but they cannot be seen. A dark elf by the name of Dirum Serethi tells the player that everyone in the community all of a sudden became invisible several weeks ago. At first, they all seem to have enjoyed it with its novelty, but now it grows tiresome on the villagers and is bad for business. He also mentions it was likely the doing of someone by the name of Ankatar. The player then asks Dirum to elaborate further on who Ankatar is. Apparently, he is a wizard that lives at a nearby settlement called Fort Caractacus, who has been inhabiting it for several years. He has always been dabbling in magical experiments, but this was by far the worst one yet, as it is heavily affecting all of the members of Ailswell. Dirum then asks the player to go and seek a cure for the invisibility from Ankatar. Fort Caractacus is a short distance away from the hamlet. However, the player is more than likely to encounter invisible monsters and animals who have also been affected by this magical experiment. After dispatching any of the potential threats, upon arriving at the fort, the player may very well hear the voice of an elf yelling at them. This male voice will tell you to go away and to not disturb him. Inspecting and wandering around the exterior fort, the player will come across a high elf in Mage's Guild robes, who is the wizard called Ankatar, although he himself is also invisible. Confronting the wizard, he tells the player that he actually casted the invisibility spell in order to hide himself from the local townsfolk due to their complaints about his other experiments. In his fine-tuning, he made the spell's range a little too wide, and it seemingly affected everyone else in the area. He does reveal that it will wear off in a few years, but there is a way to reverse the spell using a scroll, which he then hands to the player and also gives you instructions on how to use it. By doing more prying, he will also fess up to the scroll having side effects upon its use and give the player a magical ring of protection to wear while casting. The player can now head back to Ailswell and begin the process of removing the invisibility spell. By equipping the ring of protection and standing in the center of the small community, the player equips the scroll and casts the required spell. In a flash, all of these settlers can now be seen and the active effect has been removed. Returning to Ailswell Inn, the player will find Dirum Serethi, who is extremely grateful for all of your help. He tells you that you will receive free lodging here for the rest of your days, and you also are granted with an extra fame point, thus concluding the quest. Worth noting is that if the Ring of Protection is not worn while using the scroll, a damage luck of 50 points is inflicted on the player. If the player fails to use the first scroll properly, a second one can then be handed over by Ankatar, though he will not be happy about it. The first scroll can be used on Ankatar himself, which will reveal his identity and physical appearance, though this will also continue to make him unhappy. Finally, if the player fails to successfully use the second scroll, a third one will not be given to the player, and you will be shunned by Ankatar and the village of Ailswell, ultimately failing the quest. Overall, this is an interesting errand to run, but it is a fetch quest at the end of the day. Although it certainly does qualify as unexpected by just wandering through Ailswell, the player will have thought of the settlement as long abandoned, yet to their surprise, there is more going on there than meets the eye. The third and final quest on this list is titled Whom Gods Annoy. If the player ever finds themselves in Leyawiin, you may hear some rumors around town of a woman named Rosentia Galenis. The word from the citizens is that there are strange animalistic noises coming from her house. If the player chooses to investigate the matter, upon heading into her home, you will happen across a very staggering scene. Rosentia is being followed by 4 docile Daedric creatures called Everscamps. During the first conversation between the two of you, Rosentia expresses her discomfort with the whole situation and asks for your help. Upon agreeing, she will go into more detail about how this whole scenario came to be. Apparently, a couple of weeks ago, a mysterious spell sword was passing through town and heard Rosentia was interested in buying mysterious artifacts. He presented her with a staff, which she knew was Daedric in nature, yet excited her even more. The staff was sold for an incredibly cheap amount of gold, and then the mysterious stranger left Leyawiin. Carved on the side of the staff were Daedric runes, which she translated and said aloud, ultimately causing the 4 harmless scamps to be summoned. The issue now is they won't go away and are extremely loud, reckless, and smelly. For some reason, Rosentia can't bring herself to simply be rid of the staff, insinuating that it has a curse placed upon it. Finally, Rosentia mentions a good starting place for finding out more information on what to do is the Mages Guild. This is where the player should talk to someone by the name of Alv Zuvenom. The player heads to the Mages Guild hub in Leyawiin to seek out the dark elf named Alv Zuvenom. Once found, she can immediately guess the matter of discussion solely based off of the player's smell. Alv says that she has done some research and discovered that the Daedric relic is called the Staff of the Everscamp. This cursed staff is the twisted creation conjured up by none other than the Daedric prince, Sheogorath. The staff can only be discarded if another person willingly accepts it from you, in which they will then receive the same curse and the cycle continues. The only hope Rosentia has is if the staff is returned to a Sheogorath shrine that's located at the bottom of Dark Fathom Cave. She then tells the player that another catch to the staff is it lowers the bearer's speed. It is here that the player thanks Alves and returns to Rosentia's house in order to relieve her of the staff and the burden. The player then slowly makes their way to Dark Fathom Cave. Inside the cave, the player will find up to a dozen Daedric enemies which will attack the player. With decreased movement speed, these fights can prove to be challenging and tedious. What's more, the Everscamps following you don't provide any help at all, and in fact, more so get in the way and drop the game's frame rates. Recommended for this cave is to have plenty of potions of speed, or to clear it out ahead of time before embarking on this quest. The cave itself has only one zone, and once the player reaches the end of said zone, the lost and forgotten shrine of Sheogorath is discovered. Upon seeing it, a message will pop up telling the player that they no longer feel compelled to hold on to the staff. The player can then approach the shrine and drop the staff from their inventory, forever relieving yourself and anyone else from this curse. You can now return to Rosentia's house in Leyawiin with no more scamps following you, as well as fully recovered movement speed. Rosentia will thank the player for all of their help, and then reward the player with enchanted jewelry called the Ring of Eidolon's Edge, thus ending the quest. This quest is quite intriguing as it involves Sheogorath, a Daedric prince, who has another, more public shrine north of Leyawiin, as well as an entire DLC dedicated to him, giving him lots of screen time. Even though this quest can be hard to discover through rumors, and if the player never ventures into Rosentia's house, then the issue at hand would never be seen, these are not what makes the quest unexpected. The unforeseen aspect of this quest is due to the surprise factor when seeing 4 scamps seemingly behaving themselves in a ruly setting. These are Daedric beings that the player is constantly fighting in the plains of Oblivion or from being summoned by a conjurer. It is quite a scene to be taken aback by when first laying eyes on it. Overall, these are among multiple quests that have a certain surprise factor when presented to the player. An Unexpected Voyage sees the ship that the player is sleeping on set sail, only for you to discover it was taken over by bandits. Zero Visibility has the player wandering what they think is an abandoned village, only to discover that the inhabitants have been cursed with an invisibility spell. Finally, Whom Gods Annoy sees the player stumbling across 4 scamps that are irritating an unsuspecting woman due to a mysterious, newly purchased Daedric artifact. These quests are truly testaments to the strange and bizarre happenings that occur daily in the land of Tamriel.